Parents, I do want to thank you for bringing your kids. We're going to be thinking a lot about loving our neighbor today and what that looks like. And honestly, the greatest way you can love your children is by bringing them to Jesus' feet so they can learn from him. And today we're going to learn about how as we grow in our relationship with Jesus, we also gain a clear picture of what friendship looks like. And so we're going to hear from our reading, and that's a central part of that reading today. And Scott's going to read for us.
Our Old Testament reading comes from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, and talks of David and Jonathan's special relationship. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul, and Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. This is the word of the Lord.
So I saw well in advance that the reading for this week would be one that focuses largely on friendship. And I knew that was going to be an important topic today. But until this week came and Tuesday came, I had no idea how important that topic really would be. It's been a rough week. It's been a really rough week, and some of you might be like, oh man, more of this. But you know what? The election and the results have been such a huge part of our week, we cannot not talk about it a little bit today. I got back on Tuesday, on Election Day. I had a Bible study that night with some friends from Genesis, and then I went and I visited a family, and it was at their house, and it was nice to kind of reconnect and find out what was going on in their lives. And I got home kind of later than normal, and my wife was asleep on the couch, and I sat down, I turned on the TV, and over the course of the next 30 to 45 minutes, my jaw just dropped. I'm like, what is going on? And I started thinking, what is this going to do? What is this going to mean for our country? And in the sense of like, people did not expect this result. And so I did what a lot of people naturally do, and I thought, okay, let's go on social media and see what's going on there, because I'm kind of curious, actually. And I found some of you probably, I know, swear off social media, and it's not always necessarily a bad idea. Sometimes Twitter and Facebook and all these different social media outlets can be a lot of fun, especially when you're watching something enjoyable like a World Series, and you can feel like you're actually engaging in a bit of a party with people when people are excited and the game's going down to the wire and you can hear other people's comments. It feels like you're in the middle of a party with people. But on Tuesday, it felt like when I went online, I felt like I was in the middle of a shouting match. It was incredible. You had people saying things like inviting people to move to Canada. You had people saying things like using all sorts of isms to describe other people. You had one person saying that anybody who voted for such and such, I hate you, I'm never going to forgive you. I saw all sorts of crazy things being written online. And I saw one of my own friends, actually, she wrote a little post pleading with her own friends on Facebook not to unfriend people based on who they voted for. So apparently some people were threatening that as well. It was just unbelievable. And you could see that friends were kind of being turned against each other a little bit. And I even looked online, and some people that I wouldn't have known who they voted for, suddenly it's all coming out, and it was really ugly. I talked to a member of our congregation briefly earlier this week, and she said she shared the same feelings I had, which is when I went online, I was like, man, I'm done with this. Done. She's like, I just was about ready to turn it off, just be completely over with it. And let's be honest here. Regardless of whether we're talking about election, or if we're talking about our relationship with those people who are closest to us, we have failed as friends this week. We have failed to be friends to other people. And we quite frankly should be ashamed of it. We have failed in so many different ways to be friends to others. And I'm not talking about just being nice. Being a friend is is much deeper than being nice. And the reason why this last week has been so hard and hurtful for people, and why you've seen people really just disgusted and troubled, it's because we know deep down inside that we were created for friendship. We need friends. And when we see things not right in our relationships, it's very deeply troubling. If you open up the Bible to Genesis chapter 2, you get a picture of what we typically talk about in terms of marriage. God created the entire world, and then he sees Adam, first man, all by himself, and he says, "It is not good that man should be alone." And then what God does after that is he creates Eve, and the institution of marriage is created, basically, and God says, "Go be fruitful and multiply." A lot of times you look at that part of the Bible and we say, okay, this is when God creates the institution of marriage, which is true. But we need to sometimes stop earlier on and recognize those words that God says. It is not good that man should be alone. And hear that what God is telling us is that it is not good for us to be without friends. We are designed to love our neighbor. We are designed to be in community. We are designed for relationship. We are designed for friends. And it's important for me to acknowledge that, because not everybody in this room was called to be a husband or a wife, but every single one of us here today is called to be a friend. There's nobody that escapes that calling. And it's good to acknowledge. It says this in Proverbs 17:17, "A friend loved at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." What is it that oftentimes gets us through the most difficult times in life? Think about in your own life, a time when you were having it real rough, or you're having a difficult moment. What was it that got you through it? I would argue it's probably the friends that you have that got you through it. In fact, I visited somebody on Friday in the hospital, and he was spending a lot of time actually sharing the people who had visited him and how much of an encouragement it was to know that he's not by himself. And going through this very difficult time, he had people that were present. Now, I want you to think about this, though. So it's nearly impossible, I would argue, very difficult to get through adversity without friends. But if you look at the Bible and you look at the world around us and you look at our own lives, we also have to acknowledge that it's impossible to get through life without adversity. Therefore, it stands to reason that it's impossible, really, very difficult to get through life itself without friends, isn't it? We need friends, and that's why today it's important for us to remember that we have the greatest friend of all in Jesus. And a relationship with Jesus has an impact on how we relate to other people and how we love other people and how we are friends to other people. Brothers and sisters, I think it's important for us to remember this week especially that as important as elections are and as important as it is to participate in the voting process, does a president have a bigger impact on your children than you? Does a president have a bigger impact on your friends than you? You see, if we are honest with ourselves, and this was something that really struck me when I visited that family that night and when I was in Bible study, it's ultimately that call that God has for each of us to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's through that calling to love our neighbor and to seek their greatest good that we can have the greatest impact on those around us and a greater impact than any presidential candidate. And so, if that's true, if we need friends, if we can't get through life without friends, and being a friend can have the biggest impact on those people around us, I guess we should ask the question, what does that look like? Well, today we get a picture, an illustration of what a powerful friendship can look like, and this is probably the greatest example in the Bible of two earthly friends, David and Jonathan. Let me give you a little bit of a background, and we'll dig into this a little bit. David is known as the greatest king in the Bible because basically, the greatest king in the Old Testament. Jesus is the greatest king of all, but he's the greatest king in the Old Testament. And what David did as a king was he united all of God's people. They were scattered and divided, and division is something that, we're closely, we on our minds a lot these days. But David was able to, as a king, to bring everybody together. And then from David's line, eventually Jesus was born. But before Jesus was born and before David could bring everybody together, David had to ascend to the throne. And today we actually find ourselves taking a look at a point in David's life where he was most at danger. His life was constantly threatened. So David had just killed the giant Goliath. And just get this in your head. Basically what happened was David had done this amazing thing that all the people had seen. And so he had captured the hearts and minds of the people. They loved David, but there was a problem. They already had another king. His name was Saul. And Saul didn't quite like it that everybody liked David more than him. And so what do you think Saul started to think about doing? He said, I'm going to kill David. You get rid of him. He's the problem. So basically, for about 5 chapters of the Bible, you have David basically running for his life, trying to escape Saul's grasp, and his life is constantly threatened. How do you think God got him through that time? Did he, send a lightning bolt or do something crazy, extraordinary? No, he worked through a friendship. You see, David, he developed a friendship with a man named Jonathan, and Jonathan actually was King Saul's son. Jonathan was next in line to be king. So it's crazy to think that Jonathan would then befriend David, because David eventually would become king and take the position that Jonathan, by birthright, would have believed that he should have had. But instead, what you have is Jonathan saying, I'm going to be here, I'm here for you. I'm going to seek your greatest good. And you see this play out in their relationship, and how David is constantly warned by Jonathan. In a number of different circumstances, Jonathan keeps David safe. What we can see, David and Jonathan weren't perfect people, they're sinners just like us, but we can see a picture, we can get a picture of what really we need in our own relationships, especially in the verse that was read today. This is 1 Samuel 18, verse 1 through 5, which was read earlier. This is the very beginning of David and Jonathan's relationship, and you have established basically three things, I think you can say, that is needed in friendship. That's needed in friendship, and we're going to just take a look at that for a second and use that as an opportunity to kind of take a look at our own friendships. So just to give you an overview, when David and Jonathan first met, three things happened. Jonathan made a promise, made a covenant with David, okay? And after he made a covenant, then we're told also that their souls were knitted together as one. And then Jonathan actually gives David his royal garments and his weapons, and he puts it all on David. And through those three things, we can glean some helpful understanding as to what friendship looks like and what we really need in our own friendships. So the first thing is steadfastness. So David and Jonathan made a promise with one another. It wasn't like, oh, I got your back today. This was a long-term promise. I'm going to be by your side no matter what. What we need more than anything else, one of the biggest things we need in our relationships and our friendships is steadfastness. All too often, our friendships and our relationships are more transactional in nature. It's more based on expectations. What you're doing for me and whether I'm going to be there for you is kind of how I feel about you today. That oftentimes happens, isn't it? Even in our closest relationships, we find ourselves in that situation. And when there's no benefit to the cost of our relationship, sometimes it's tempting to not be there. But in a true friendship, as you see with David and Jonathan, this promise is, I'm going to be by your side no matter what. Even when you have nothing to offer me, I'm going to be there for you. And that's what we need. We need somebody who's going to be there for us. Our best friends, we would hope that's what they would offer for us. That's what we would hope we'd see in our marriages, in our families. And so consider that. What do we need in our friendships? Steadfastness. Consider how much you desire that yourself. Secondly, vulnerability. Another important point. So David and Jonathan's souls were knitted together as one. You get a sense that there was transparency in the relationship, a sense of intimacy. So it wasn't like they weren't holding secrets from each other. Everybody has baggage. We're all sinners. We all have a past, a history, things that we've done that we're not proud of, things that we have not done that we're not proud of, okay? Who are the people that you're most likely to share your greatest fears and some of those things that you carry around with you? Who are the people that you're willing to open up with and share with? I would argue that those are probably the people you consider to be friends. Because more than anything, we desire safety. I can't, in a Bible study, I can't ask a whole bunch of people, hey, tell me your deepest, darkest fears and what you're carrying around, because it's not safe. Our greatest fear is that people will know what we have in our hearts, know where we've been, and they won't love us. And so it's only in our closest friendships where there's trust build up, where there's also vulnerability. And you see that with David and Jonathan. Thirdly, sacrificial love. So Jonathan gives David his royal garments, his weapons, and basically, do you see what's the symbolism of what's happening here? What was Jonathan in line to become? The next king. And he gives David his garments. He gives him everything, and he's basically giving up his crown so that David can wear it. He's basically saying, I am here for you. This relationship is about me for you. As I said before, all too often relationships can be about what you're doing for me, but a true friendship is entirely me for you. And this isn't about just being nice. okay? Sometimes we simplify what sacrificial love is. It means giving up things for the sake of the other person. So a true friend will sometimes look at me and say things I don't want to hear because it's for my greatest good, even though it might put a strain on our relationship, even though that friend may not like how I respond, even though I might be a bit defensive, he's going to speak the truth to me anyway because he's willing to sacrifice some of that peace for my greater good. Also, power, sacrificing power in our relationships. When you find yourself in a struggle with a friend, to offer sacrificial love is to give up the power that's associated with being right sometimes, maybe admitting that I'm not right and asking for forgiveness. Or on the flip side, when that other person comes up to me and asks me for forgiveness, offering it to them and giving up that power that's associated with holding that wrong that's done against me against that other person. So what do we need in our friendships? If you look at David and Jonathan and you think about our own lives and what we experience every single day, we need steadfastness. We need a relationship that has vulnerability in it. And we need sacrificial love. And I guess we see that all three of those together every single day, don't we? See, that's the problem. We see this sometimes. We see glimpses of this. Even our closest relationships, sometimes that's true, but it's not always, and then people disappoint us. And that's why ultimately, if we're gonna recognize what we need from a friendship, we need to recognize that we find all of these things perfectly in Jesus. So first of all, Jesus is steadfast. What do we have to offer him? See? If relationships are about, I'm going to be there for you and you have something to give me, what do we have to offer Jesus? You see, this is the crazy thing about Jesus. When we give up on ourselves, when we give up on other people, on a week like this, when we are frustrated with this world and we think, Jesus, you can't do anything for this current circumstance, for this current situation, Jesus still dies for us. Jesus makes a promise. He promises you that he's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. And even when you turn away from him, he's still there giving his life for you on a cross. He will always be there to pick you up, dust you off, forgive you, and remind you that there is hope. And the hope you have is greater than any hope that any presidential candidate can offer. Isn't that good news? It's great news. Secondly, Jesus became vulnerable for you. Think of Jesus with his arms spread wide, arms nailed to a cross, stripped of his clothing, people mocking him, spitting on him. Does it get any more vulnerable than that? He made himself vulnerable. And as we struggle with our own inner demons, our own sins, our own baggage that we carry around every day, and we're afraid that other people would see it and know the truth, what Jesus does is he makes himself vulnerable for us so that we can know we're forgiven and we're not defined by those things. And so because Jesus became vulnerable for you, you can then therefore be vulnerable around others. And suddenly those hurts, the things that we carry around in our lives, honestly can become a way to witness to the incredible power of Jesus' friendship. Thirdly, Jesus embodies sacrificial love. The Bible itself says that the perfect image of love is Jesus hanging on a cross. The perfect image of me for you. Remember what Jonathan did for David? He gave up his crown so David could wear it. And this is what Jesus does for us. Jesus gave up a heavenly crown to wear what kind of a crown? A crown of thorns. And he gave up his heavenly crown ultimately so that you and I could wear it, the crown of eternal life. That's his promise. It says this in John 15, 12 through 13. Jesus said this. He said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." We can hear these words as a command, and we should, the call to love our neighbor, but I hear it first and foremost as an illustration, as a commentary on Jesus' own life. How do we know that Jesus is our greatest friend? How do you know that he's your greatest friend? He gave his life for you. And what you discover is that we have the greatest friend of all in Jesus. And isn't that good news this week? That Jesus would enter into the chaos, into the disunity, into the fracturing of relationships, into all the things that disgust us about the brokenness of this world. We see the perfect friend in Jesus entering into this. And we can find rest in him. And you can close your eyes and you can know that I have a steadfast friend who is there for me every single day to speak things that I need to hear to me. You're loved. You're forgiven. You have hope. And Jesus says, I am your hope. You have a friend in Jesus who makes himself completely vulnerable for you. I think this is one of the reasons why people have struggled in many ways this week. People have become vulnerable because false hopes, all the false hopes that we have in life, in some cases have been exposed. And instead of people being present, it's been a lot of angry words and hurtfulness. And Jesus became vulnerable so that we could become vulnerable. And then of course, then Jesus also offers himself up as the ultimate loving sacrifice. When you recognize the ultimate friend we have in Jesus, you find the strength actually to be friends to others. I want to tell you, this is one of the things I was looking for on Facebook this week. I was hoping I'd see something. When I looked online, I was just praying that I'd see some comments that were different. Because when you have a relationship with Jesus, when you see him as your greatest friend, it changes the way you relate to other people and the way you interact with other people and the way we view friendship. And I was encouraged, actually, when I woke up Wednesday morning because I saw a number of people were posting scripture, posting prayers, and I ran across one particular comment that really, honestly, kind of touched me because it was different and I knew where it was coming from. And this was from the same person I talked to earlier that said, I'm swearing off Facebook, I'm done. I was feeling the same way. And what she did was, she basically said, you know what, I'm going to try something different. And so she wrote a general note basically to her friends on Facebook, and this is what she said. She said, "Dear friend, I sense that you're out of sorts today. I would like to offer you a word of encouragement. You're an awesome human being. We're friends, right? I know how wonderful you are. I seek you out because I enjoy being with you. One of the things I like about you is that you see things differently than I do. After we talk, I think a lot about what you said. Sometimes your words are very wise and your perspective changes the way I see the world. Other times we disagree. But even in those times we disagree, I can see the person that I love. If I really listen to you, I can hear your passion, and I sense how deeply you care about certain things. I marvel at you. Sometimes I'm saddened to learn that your views come from a place of past hurt. The things you reveal about yourself help me to see you with new eyes. They help me to understand who you are and why you believe what you believe. I feel humbled when you share yourself with me." What a different comment. And where does that difference come from? It comes from a heart that knows that its true hope is Jesus. And what you sense in there is you don't get it's not a bunch of preachiness, it's not a bunch of I told you so's, or you're wrong and I'm right, it's steadfastness, some vulnerability, and sacrificial love. Not just being nice, also agreeing, also recognizing that there are some things we disagree on, but simply being there as a friend. Brothers and sisters in Christ, if you look around this room, you'll notice there's lots of people here, all with different things going on in their lives, and the people in this room need friends. You look at that cross, and you see our greatest friend of all, Jesus. In response to his friendship and being in a relationship with him, let's go and be friends for Jesus' sake. Amen.